Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Rival Recon here on Anfield Index Pro. The Reds progressed to the next round of the Champions League despite losing at Anfield for the first time in what feels like forever. However, on this week's pod, we'll be focusing back on the Premier League and the pursuits for the Premier League title, of course. 2 games coming thick and fast in a number of days now, of course, Brighton and then Arsenal. But on this week's podcast, we'll be focusing on the upcoming game this weekend against Brighton. And joining us to give us his insight into sort of his relationship with the club and just what he thinks of the job that Graham Potter is doing at Brighton, we welcome on journalist and producer for BBC Radio 4 and World Service Documentaries, Jim Frank. Welcome, Jim.
Good to be here, Harry.
No, good to speak with you, and I think it's always been an interesting podcast when I've spoken about Brighton in recent years, and often we've had Andy Naylor on from The Athletic, and he lived in Brighton, supported Brighton for majority of his life as well, and has often gone into detail around sort of the journey they've been on, and certainly how impressed he's been over the past couple of years in terms of the work that's gone on at the club and some of the development that's been visible for all of us to see under Graham Potter. But before we get into anything around this season, I did want to ask you, as you're also sort of a lifelong Brighton fan, one, how your relationship started with the club, sort of what your first few memories were of following Brighton, and then also actually just perhaps what your favourite memories of following Brighton have been.
Sure. Well, I'm a local lad, so they were the nearest team, and I begged my dad to take me, and eventually gave in and took me for my birthday.
How old were you? I
was 8. That was my first game in the 70s, and then Brighton lost that game and were relegated that season.
That could easily have damaged your relationship there.
It could have done. But I didn't go for a couple of years after that, and then picked it up again when Alan Mullery was the manager, and he put together an exciting side. Mark Lawrenson, who then of course went on to play for Liverpool.
Yeah,
Peter
familiar.
Ward, Brian Horton, and they rose through the divisions and got into the top flight as the old First Division, as was then, I think, in 78, 79, and stayed there for 4 years before being relegated and then plummeting through the divisions as they did. I mean, that was a tremendously exciting time, as a teenage boy, to watch your local side have rise through from the third to the second to the First Division, playing in front of pretty large crowds. 30,000 was not unusual at the Goldstone in those days.
And how people talk about sort of teams and teams necessarily having a philosophy. I mean, it feels like the word philosophy is bandied around a lot these days in terms of teams having a pretty well-defined style of play and things like that. Was there a style of play that Brighton played during those years that you remembered in terms of sort of how the Brighton side would play when everything clicked?
Well, they would attack. That's what I remembered, really, mostly from those years at the Goldstone, that they attacked and they scored a lot of goals. So they were a good, attractive side to watch. And I think that's always been at the heart of a decent Brighton side. I think the Brighton public expect to see attacking football right up until today. Actually, we can get on to that a bit later. But they've always been good to watch, really. I mean, they've had a few wilderness years, obviously, quite a lot of wilderness years, in fact. but on the whole, they've been a good team to watch, particularly at home.
And in terms of your favourite memories of following the club as well, are there any things that particularly stick out to you? Obviously, those early memories will be some of the strongest, I imagine. But
the big formative memory was Brighton getting to the cup final in 1983. The semi-final at Highbury. I remember standing at the clock end with must have been about 20,000 Brighton fans. A Jimmy Case thunderbolt as we beat Sheffield Wednesday, and then the final itself, which was a 2-2 draw, and of course that very famous miss by Gordon Smith in extra time, and the replay. We won't talk about the replay because we got stuffed 4-0. But I mean that was tremendously exciting, and I think in those days that would be the standout memory. I think as an adult watching them, it's hard not to have been very moved actually when Albion played their first game in the new stadium in Brighton at Falmer 10 years ago. That was a hell of a moment.
Yeah, it's a lovely stadium to watch a game in as well. Actually, having been, it's a great place to watch football. And I almost want to ask as well. I mean, since Brighton have returned to the Premier League as well, has there been a particular memory that you think of, or a particular game that you sticks in the memory as sort of now we've returned to the big time? Obviously Brighton have been more and more competitive, and we'll come and talk about this season. But was there a particular memory since the club's got back into the Premier League that you remember?
Well, I think last season the first game with a limited crowd after lockdown, actually, when Brighton beat Man City 3-2. Now, Man City were already champions, and it's arguable that they had sort of taken their foot off the pedal a little bit, but they were 2-0 down and came back to win 3-2 Brighton, and that was a wonderful night, actually. That was a wonderful night. So that one sticks out for me.
Yeah, I can't remember who the goal scorer was. It's going to really annoy me, but I think for me, probably one of the memories that's burned into my head for some reason when it comes to Brighton is when you took the lead over City on the last day of the season, when it was very improbable that Liverpool were going to win the league anymore, and Liverpool, of course, ended up finishing second by 1 point. But I think there were about 90 seconds of euphoria that season as well, to be honest.
There were. We went 1-0 up. It was the last game of the season, wasn't it?
It was,
Was it Murray?
I think it could have been Murray, yeah.
I think it might have been Glenn Murray. But yeah, the joy didn't last very long, did it?
Really didn't, no. I think it was just long enough for people to check their phones at Anfield. Just realise that it was gone.
That City result last year was really a great performance.
No, absolutely. It has to be whenever you're taking points off this City side. And I suppose, I mean, before we get on to this season again as well, since the appointment of Graham Potter, I mean, what have you made of him, both in terms of what he's done on the pitch, but also how he's carried himself off the pitch, and as a manager who's really seemed to take into heart really the significance of being Brighton manager?
Well, I'm a huge fan. I think the fact that he's managed to improve so many players is testament for what a great coach he is. His man management skills are well known, but he's just very calm and very clever. He never gets carried away if we win, never gets too down if we lose. But it's his tactical acumen during the games which I think is so impressive. Able to switch formations very quickly, very easily. And he's got them, playing a completely different style out from the back, on the ground, to the previous manager, Chris Hughton, who, of course, we all love as well. But the brand of football that we're playing now, I think, is the best we've ever played. It's the best football a Brighton team has ever produced. And at times, it's a joy to watch. Now, we haven't always had the results that I think we've deserved. We're going through a bit of a blip at the moment, which no doubt we'll come on to in a minute. But overall, he's done a great job. The home form's not great, but there are reasons for that, I think, in the sort of forward department. But yeah, Graham Potter's done a fantastic job, and I hope he's with us for many years to come. Although, I suspect he'll probably leave to bigger things, one day.
Yeah, no, I think it's been a real stark contrast at times when you've seen clubs that have a lot more money at their disposal, often coached by people who actually think when you put everything on paper really shouldn't be in those jobs. And I think I've been thinking about matches frequently when Brighton come up against those sides, and often Brighton end up maybe losing those games just because of the disparity in quality. Another side will have a exceptional striker or somebody who can make the difference despite the team performance not being up to scratch. And I'm thinking about even Man United games, as I would say as a Liverpool fan, but I remember the Man United game against Brighton. I think it was last season, wasn't it, where they invented that new rule where you could have a penalty after the full-time whistle, which was a fun thing.
Extraordinary.
But
again, I think we hit the post and bar 5 times that match. I think Trossard hit the woodwork 4 times on his own. We outplayed them and yet still ended up losing the game. But the performances were excellent. So even though there was a small element of fans who were unhappy with him,
right,
because we weren't winning very much, I thought that, the underlying performances were so good that it was only a matter of time before he turned it round, and of course he did. He's a great manager. He's a really good manager, and I wouldn't be surprised if he went on to be England manager one day. He's that good.
Yeah, no, I've been very impressed from the outside in, actually, just seeing the way in which he carries himself, the way in which, as you mentioned, he's improved certain players, and it's always very evident when you watch a side, and they are clearly very well drilled and understand exactly where they should be and what they should be doing, regardless of whether or not they can actually pull it off. And you mentioned there, obviously, Trossard hitting the post 4 times on that day, but in terms of the movements, the structure, it's been very, very clear to see. And of course, since XG came into the game as well, as you mentioned there's now metrics to sort of quantify that underlying performance that you were talking about there. I mean, if you're not able to see a game, you can very often just look at it now and go, well, it looks like they performed pretty well if they were supposedly created enough chances to score a couple goals, even if they didn't end up scoring them. And I think for many people looking at Brighton, certainly from a statistical point of view, they were very much looking at him and going, well, this can't last in terms of Brighton not putting the ball in the back of the net. They're creating so many chances last season, certainly, that they weren't putting away. I suppose that carries us into this season. I mean, before ball was kicked, sounds like you were expecting better things based on the performances you saw last season. I mean, what really were your expectations at the start of the season before ball was kicked?
Well, it's always difficult to expect very much from Brighton, because they've always tend to have a habit of sort of letting you down at the last moment. But I think improving the league position is really difficult for Brighton. So I think we were all hoping that we wouldn't be involved in a relegation fight, because for the four seasons we've been back in the Premier League, or in the Premier League, we've had a relegation struggle each time. So this season's been really refreshing and good to see that hasn't happened. There are a few sort of nervous glances at the moment because of the bad run the club are in. But I mean, the club have said that they're aiming to have a top 10 finish, not this season, but they want to be a top 10 club. So some people's expectations have been raised, but I think, they finished, where have they finished? They finished sort of, 17th, 15th, 16th, that sort of position. If they could finish, between 15th and 10th, that would be an improvement. And with the limited budget that they've got, that would be, a really, really good achievement. So I suppose that's what I hoped for, and so far that's kind of happening. I mean, they started the season brilliantly. They won 4 out of the 5 first league games, and that was an amazing start. But that wasn't going to be sustainable over the course of the season. But they've produced some great performances. Coming back at Anfield, for instance, that stands out as being one of the best performances of the season. 2-0 down after half an hour was it, and came back and drew 2-2, and perhaps could have nicked it at the end. That was a really fantastic performance. So they are capable on the day of beating or giving anyone a really good game.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually in terms of games that you think are symptomatic of this season so far. Obviously the good in terms of those performances and even sort of the comeback against Liverpool, but then also maybe a game that highlights some of the issues that are still there as well.
Yeah, I mean if we're looking for the best performance of the season, I think Liverpool away, you've got to go some way to beat that, really. Not many teams come back from 2-0 down at Anfield with Liverpool playing the brilliant football that they have been doing.
And it wasn't a fluke either. It was a well thought out, planned, structured performance. The goals you scored were well constructed. They weren't somebody smashing one in from 35 yards. That you really did cause us a lot of problems on the day.
I think if you're looking more recently, a game that sort of does sum up Brighton at the moment is Man United away, where we lost 2-0, but played United off the park in the first half. De Gea made a world-class save from Moda. Basuma missed a very good chance. So it's quite. On another day, Brighton could have gone in 2-0 up at half time. As it was, United broke the deadlock soon after. Dunk got sent off on a kind of marginal decision, and then Brighton trying to press to get back in the game, which would have been 1-1. Hit the bar, did everything but score again, and then United broke away. I think if you look at Brighton's overall record, they've only scored 26 goals this season from 27 matches. And that's just not enough. So there's obviously something still going on up front. But I think more recently and a little bit worrying is the fact that they've conceded 9 goals in the last 4 games. And that's very unlike Brighton. Under Potter, they've been very tight. And I think one of the reasons why that's happened is that Adam Webster, who's been increasingly influential in that back three that Potter likes to play, has been injured a lot, and he's been out. Dunk was injured, just coming back. They've sold Dan Burn, so they've had to rotate quite a lot at the back, and I think that hasn't helped. And plus Sanchez, the keeper, is after having an incredible breakthrough season last year, is having he's a very young keeper, but there are a few mistakes there. So I think the defence needs looking at, and I think in the summer they will definitely have to buy a ball-playing left-sided centre half, because that's what Brighton rely on Webster and Dunk bringing the ball out so much, which then creates space for them to start their attacks. So that'll have to be addressed.
Yeah, I think. Sort of slightly brings us on to sort of the transfer activity. Obviously, the funds that are available aren't comparable with a lot of sides in the league, but I think sold very well in terms of the fact that Ben White ends up going for 52 odd million pounds to Arsenal. Dan Burn 13 odd 14 million pounds, and then the spending of that money as well. I think. In Mwepu, I'd probably ask you sort of how he's been so far in here, because I've not seen too much of him. But Cucurella, for example, has been a very obvious one to spot. Looked like a great piece of business before he kicked the ball. And as far as I'm concerned, I think he's been a wonderful signing, especially when you think he's 23 years old. To get that player in for 16 million seems like a wonderful bit of business. I just want to ask you, how the new signings have done, but then also how you felt about letting go of both Ben White and now Dan Burn.
Well, I think let's start with the outgoings first, because I think Ben White. It was fairly obvious that Ben White was going to leave. I think last summer, and 52 million quid is a very good fee for him. He gets to for the club. He gets to play for Arsenal, and the club get the money. Having said that, I think we have missed him. There's been quite a few Brighton fans who've just sort of, rejoiced about the size of the fee. But Ben White is still a young player himself, and he can play in a number of different positions. And he was exactly the sort of player that Potter likes, someone who's very good on the ball, very comfortable on the ball, who can bring it out.
And no one came in to replace him, did they?
No one came in to replace him. No. And again, that's, Duffy came back from Celtic after a really disastrous loan up there. And much to most people's surprise, most of us thought we wouldn't see him play for Brighton again. He's been playing okay, but he can't bring the ball out like Ben White, like Lewis Dunk, or like Adam Webster. So I think they will definitely have to buy someone in the summer to do that. Dan Burn, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about Potter improving players. If there's ever a player, if there's ever an example of that, Dan Burn is it. I mean, the way that Potter has brought him on is incredibly impressive. From a slightly sort of gangly player whose first touch wasn't considered that good, Potter has made him this ferociously competitive, ball playing, ball carrying, left-sided centre half or left wing back, and he was on the form of his life when Newcastle came in for him. And I think, again, a lot of Brighton fans are saying, "Oh, Dan Burn's gone, and we've lost every game since he's gone." But he's 29. Newcastle were his dream boyhood club. They've no doubt given him a good pay rise. Very difficult to say to him, you can't go. And also, Brighton have got a habit of signing players up that they want to keep, particularly the younger ones, because then you get the resale value. There was no reports that I saw that Brighton were going to offer him another contract. So I think it worked for both parties.
Right.
We have missed him. I mean, in terms of the players that we've bought in, and it's been quite quiet this year. Cucurella has been the standout signing. Hit the ground running, very skillful, very quick. He looks a bargain at 15 million. I think he will. I doubt there's a Brighton player who's had a better season than him at the moment, although he's slightly off the boil at this current time. And Iwepu scored that sort of wonder goal at Anfield that you'll remember to get us back in the game. But he's had a lot of problems with injuries as well, which is a real shame because he can pick a pass and he looks like he's scored a couple of goals. And one of Brighton's issues is that amongst the midfield players, if you look at sort of Moda, Pascal Gross, Adam Lallana, Yves Bissouma and Solly March, none of those five have scored a single goal this season, which I think, does help explain a little bit about why Brighton are struggling to put the ball in the back of the net.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, just before we get on to some of those creative struggles, just around, along with Cucurella, who have been the standout players for Brighton so far this season. Maybe in that earlier patch were more noticeable in terms of their performances, but if you had to highlight a few players, and maybe even some that you think have gone below the radar a little bit, who have been those really key players for Brighton?
Well, I think Trossard before Christmas was having his best time at the club. He's scoring some goals. I think he's got 3 or 4 goals, creating causing a lot of problems, looking really lively, looking like he really enjoying his football. So I would say he's been one of our best players. He's had COVID and probably struggled a little bit since then, but I would hope that he would have a strong end to the season. Adam Webster, we mentioned him a few minutes ago. He's again, when he's playing, when he's on form, he's a really important player for Brighton, and I think he was even being talked about as a possible England player at one stage. So I would say those two have been the standout players. Moda has come very, very close to scoring. That's surely not going to be too far away. This has been his kind of breakthrough season. He's going to get better and better, and they're all young players as well. So I think those three I would pick those three out really.
And then so just moving on to some of the recent games, and you look at the fixture list, and it's obviously on a run of four losses in a row. You mentioned that Man United game there, where the first half, or based on the first half, certainly it felt very unfair that the game ended up the way in which it did, and that sparked off this run. One thing that's been apparent recently has been, Brighton are the side that dominate the ball, certainly under Potter, and actually I was looking at some of the commentary around it, and actually Brighton are a top 4 team basically in terms of possession, according to sort of the average that they have around 57% possession in most games. It's only really bettered by City, Liverpool and Chelsea, which just shows you in terms of the control that they often do have in games, and I think it surprises people when they come up against those sides in the top 6, just how much of a grip on the game that they do have at times. But then they drop to 9th on chances created, and then they fall to a further 13th when it comes to the creation of big chances. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned there that obviously it'd be wonderful to have a prolific number 9 who just buries everything that you give him, but also of late has it been more of an issue now that those chances in terms of chance creation, they're just not coming frequently enough?
Yeah, I think you've put your finger on it there, and that is a worry. That if you look at last season, even though the results weren't always there, Albion created a lot of chances, and that's why their XG was predictably quite high. In the recent games, they haven't been creating a lot of chances, so that is a worry. I think, looking forward, it pains me to say it, but they probably need a player like Elise that Palace have. Young, quick, skillful, can run at a defence, can take the team 50, 60 yards up the pitch with an eye for goal. I think he was only 8 million quid from Reading. What a signing he's been, and he's going to get better and better. So I would like to see the Albion in the summer try and sign a player a little bit like that. Someone who's got pace, someone who can run at defence, open up a defence, but also has got an eye for goal.
I sometimes feel like that's slightly describing Tariq Lamptey at times, but obviously he's playing from that deeper position and maybe doesn't have as much of an eye for goal when he gets into those positions. But what have you made of his reintroduction this season after an injury?
Well, he's a tremendously exciting player. I think for him to flourish, they need to play 3 at the back, so he plays in that wing back position, and he needs the ball to be played in front of him so he can run onto it, so he can kind of get into gear, as it were, and then you can see him really accelerate and take on his man. I've seen him play this year, I think against Burnley and Villa. He was in the right back position for some of those games, and he struggled to really make an impact. So he's still he's a very young player. He's got enormous potential, but I think he's another one who's just recently, they've looked a little bit jaded. The squad's quite small, and they need to rediscover that sort of energy and intensity for the last stage of the season.
And another player who I feel has had like an interesting campaign, to be honest, based upon how his season started and then how it seemed to materialise as well, is Solly March. I just wanted to ask you what you think's happened there.
Well, Solly, I mean, interestingly, I think Andy Naylor wrote a piece about Solly March in The Athletic today, just saying that he was really a bit of a crossroads.
Yeah.
And I think that's spot on. He's not quite broken through and cemented a place that he can call his own. So I think the jury's out on Solly. He must, apparently he's not that happy because he's in and out of the side. But again, he hasn't scored a goal this season. He hasn't created many chances this season. So yeah, there's a question mark about whether Solly will be at the club next year. I mean, everyone loves Solly. He's a local boy he used to play for Lewis just down the road. So, as with most clubs, fans are desperate to see their local talent do well, but it hasn't quite happened for him this year.
And I suppose looking at the season, I mean, obviously a very promising, strong start to the season, putting away those chances that you previously been creating last time round as well. Currently sitting in 13th place on 33 points. Does feel after the last 4 games that that momentum's been slipping away a little bit. But I mean, for you, with the remainder of the season, based on what you'd already discussed, I mean, obviously comfortably safe at this stage, given what's happening, certainly with the sides in those bottom 5 positions, and Everton look like they're being pulled into it as well at the moment, based on games played at the moment. But what are you expecting for the rest of the season? Do you think Potter's going to be able to sort of help the side rediscover their creativity, or do you think it's really the improvements that the side needs can only really come from additions at this stage? I mean, what are your expectations for the rest of the season?
Well, I fully expect us to stay up.
Yes.
I think there are a few nervous glances downwards, but we are. I'll probably put the mockers on it now, but we are too good to go down.
I'd agree. Yeah.
I think I have faith in Graham Potter. I think that he will be able to turn it round. If not against Liverpool, then very soon. He's a very, very good coach, and I just think the players need to rediscover their mojo a bit. And it is a confidence thing. You could see when we played Burnley, who incidentally absolutely played us off the park, and they were really good. When we played them, as soon as they scored the first goal, you could just see, it was almost like a physical thing. You could just see that there was an extra spring in their step. And once you get that first goal, it's so important in the Premier League, especially for a club like Brighton, where goals are hard to come by. I think we'll be okay. And let's get those points we need to sort of mathematically be secure, and then we can start properly planning for next season.
Yeah, and I was looking at the fixture list and actually didn't realise that actually it was quite so tough for you in the next few games. Obviously playing Liverpool this weekend, then there's Spurs, then I think there's a postponed game, or I think it's still scheduled for mid or late March against Manchester City, and then there's the game against Norwich, Arsenal, Tottenham again.
The run is difficult. It is a difficult run in, but sometimes Brighton seem to perform better.
I was going to ask,
against the bigger clubs where the expectations aren't so high. Albion have really struggled. Where Albion have really struggled is at home against teams that are below them in the league, or the so-called lesser teams. That's when they've really struggled, because they haven't quite had the attacking nous needed to break down, stubborn defences at the Amex. And the crowd can get a little bit restless. They're quite a demanding crowd sometimes. So they haven't found it easy to get those goals and get those wins. Norwich, in a few weeks' time at the Amex, is looking like a kind of a must-win game, just to make sure. But I think Potter will sort them out. But they need Adam Webster back, and he needs to have a proper run of games so they can get a settled defence, tighten up at the back, and then hopefully the goals will come.
When's he due to be back? Out of interest into that.
Well, that's a good question. Potter, there's a press conference tomorrow, so there may be some news tomorrow. So I would hope that he might be back this weekend or for the Tottenham game, but certainly within the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
We need it.
Certainly. And just focusing briefly on the game itself then, before we wrap things up, I mean, given how well Brighton played earlier in the season away to Liverpool, and actually I think in the past as well, sort of it's always been actually a tough game in recent seasons, very well organised and sort of have a very well drilled approach to playing Liverpool, I've felt. How do you think that Potter's going to approach this game, especially considering what you were mentioning there around some of the struggles that have affected Brighton at home of late? I mean, obviously Liverpool on this title chart at the moment, but things slightly drying up a little bit in terms of the goals. Maybe it could be a combination of fatigue. Lots of players played a lot of games, come back from international tournaments and things like that, and taking a bit of time to get back to their sharpest. But knowing what you know of how Liverpool have been playing of late, how do you expect them to approach this one?
Well, the pressure's off Brighton, really, for this game, because Liverpool will be overwhelmingly the favourites to win. Liverpool are going for the title. They need all the points they get. So the onus, I think, will be on Liverpool to attack, which might actually open up the game a little bit more and suit Brighton to exploit some chances on the break. And that's tended to be the way that we've played Liverpool recently. So I would expect Liverpool to come at Brighton on Saturday, and Brighton to wait, to try and wait for the spaces and opportunities to attack Liverpool on the break. So that's what I think will happen. I think, if Webster's fit again, that will be a huge boost for the Albion. But it's gonna be a very tough game. Liverpool are, in tremendous form, even though they lost the other night to Inter Milan. It'll be a very, very tough game for Brighton.
And in terms of, I mean, sometimes we ask this question around if you could lift one player from Liverpool's side and drop them into Brighton at this stage, who would it be?
It'd be Mo Salah every day of the week. I just love Mo Salah, the way he moves, incredibly fast, incredibly skillful, brilliant dribbler, and he scores loads of goals. So that's what, I'd love to see Mo Salah in the blue and white stripes. It'll never happen, but, that's I think Mo Salah's a wonderful, wonderful player.
That's the one, is it? Yeah, no, it's often interesting asking that question, because I think, sometimes, even despite some of the attacking riches, sometimes the different teams that we're playing are just like, well, you know what, we actually really desperately need a midfielder, and so we'd take Fab or take somebody off your hands and things like that. But no, I think Mo, you don't have to look too far. And even last night, where he's hitting the post twice, but has a good attitude about it. I'm sure he'll be.
What a signing he's been. He's
absolutely.
been, what a signing for you. Just brilliant.
Absolutely. Just hope we can get that contract sorted out, actually.
What's going on with that? Is he gonna?
All the noises seem to be good. It just seems to be, maybe it's just big enough numbers that it's taking a while to sort of, iron out, to be honest, because, it was always going to be the most complex of negotiations, but I don't really see where he goes, to be honest, other than Liverpool. And everything is set up to get the most out of him. So I think it's quite a nice setup. We've seen players in the past as well think the grass is greener and go off, and very often it's not been the case. I'm thinking the only player I've seen who's left recently and I think improved and went to another level after they left us was probably Luis Suarez, and he was such a force of nature anyway. That was one of the few players that could join Messi and Neymar at Barcelona and actually raise their levels, which was kind of scary to see at the time. But yeah, you look at Coutinho, look at some other players, it's a bit more of a cautionary tale. So hopefully that will get sorted out sooner rather than later. And then just one final question. I guess it's a weird one, and it's definitely not a scouting report either. But is there a player that you look at in the Brighton side that you think, I wonder what he would look like under Jurgen Klopp, or you think that he would fit in quite nicely to this Liverpool team? And again, not a scouting report. I'm just wondering which of those players you think would actually be well suited.
Well, Cucurella,
Right. Yeah.
I think, as a wing back. But you're spoilt for choice with wing backs, aren't you? But Cucurella would be I think he could play at the very highest level if he carries on playing as he has done. He's no time at all, settled in straight away, and he's a very, very good player.
He certainly looks like it. Yeah, but I've been very, very impressed when I've watched him every time, I have to admit. But anyway, Jim, yeah, thank you so much for all the insight there on both your relationship with the club and some of your favourite memories of following Brighton over the years as they've really gone on a hell of a journey, and then ended up, I think now, probably being one of the best sides that they've ever been, to be honest. And I think an excellent manager and what looks to be a really well-oiled setup there as well. So really appreciate all the insight there.
It's a pleasure. I mean, I think Brighton it's a well-run club. Tony Bloom knows what he's doing. The chief executive knows how to run the club. Graham Potter's a fantastic coach. They've lost Dan Ashworth, the technical director. He's probably going to Newcastle, as you probably know. That's a blow. So it will be interesting to see what recruitment's like in the summer. But I think as long as Tony Bloom is in charge, and as long as he owns the club, I think he's transformed Brighton in the last 15 years or since he's been chairman. He's absolutely transformed the club. So Brighton will never be a massive club like Liverpool or Man United or Arsenal, but they're certainly not a small club now. And I think they will. I think if you're a Brighton fan, hopefully good times are ahead.
Yeah, I think they could certainly teach a few clubs that you mentioned there just how to be run better as well. To be honest, I think they've been exceptionally well run.
I think the model is probably Southampton. It's very similar sized clubs in a way, similar stadiums, put a lot of resources into the academy. Southampton obviously produced some amazingly good players over the years. I think that's the sort of blueprint for the Albion. We're a little bit behind Southampton at the moment, but I think, everything is in place for Brighton, and then they're going to do it incrementally, bit by bit, and just try and improve and get to be an established Premiership team. Maybe even win a cup one day. Who knows? That would be great.
Yeah, hopefully discover your version of Sadio Mane as well. Maybe a Virgil van Dijk out there as well. I'm sure. I mean, obviously all these players went through Southampton in one stage or another. Not to mention the academy graduates as well. So yeah, no, I think it's certainly everything is tracking in the right direction. Actually, I think that obviously the majority of the people listening to this podcast are Liverpool fans, but I think everyone listening to this on Anfield Index has always mentioned just how impressed they've been by how well run, how well drilled, how well coached Brighton appear to be. So I think certainly wish you the best for the rest of the season. Absolutely. Not sure I can do that for this weekend. Unfortunately, given what Man City are doing at the moment. Although if you feel like taking points off them as well in a few weeks, that's absolutely great as well.
We'll see what we can do.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much, Jim. And just to all those who've been listening to Rival Recon over these past few weeks, have you been enjoying it? Especially some of the new listeners who I know have been joining us over the past month or so. As you will have been able to tell, packed fixture list. It's every game now feels as intense as the last, just because we're back in that stage where the bar has been set so high, but there was a minor slip there from City that's put things back into Liverpool's hands. Let's face it, so every game is vitally important. And we'll be back again because of the sort of rescheduled game here, the Arsenal game on the 16th. We'll be back again before the weekend actually to give you that show out there, so it's ready ahead of next week's game. But until then, hope you're checking out all the other great content on Anfield Index Pro and you're enjoying the shows that we come out with each week. I'm sure Jan Mulby on his show with Trev will have something to say about some of the recent performances, and of course that Anfield record was eliminated sort of last night, despite the fact that Liverpool are progressing in the Champions League. So be sure to check out him on that. But otherwise, stay tuned in for another episode of Rival Recon. There'll be one ahead of the Arsenal game out before this weekend as well.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at anfieldindex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.